today. It was just brutally hot. And so it's I'm glad to be here virtually, certainly for tonight, and then on Saturday as well. But we always got to start with a dad joke. So what's the dentist of the year get? A little plaque. We'll start with that and then move on from there. And it has to go uphill from there, right? So this is a brochure that you guys will probably all be able to see this weekend. I sent these to you, Bob. This is a digital version of it. I'll just do a couple things on here. Just to talk about the fact that we are the patient affairs team, and we're here to support if you have issues with any kind of things around copay or
bleeding disorder,
patient assistance, any of that kind of thing. We also do all of our community connections educational programming, and of course you can find access to Pfizer Hemophilia Connect through this 800 number that everybody's pretty familiar with. But of course, we have our Factor Savings Card, like every other company that does such a great job to support the community in the financial way. And then the other thing I wanted to let you know about is Hemophilia Village, our website, has been updated in the last year or so, and there's so many resources on there. There's a whole page on females and bleeding disorder issues. And so there's places to get information. There's some videos. There are lots of new content that revolves around kind of the changing landscape of the bleeding disorder kind of market space, if you will. And so just kind of wanted to highlight that for the moment, as well as the fact that we do work with just about all the other national organizations that work with the bleeding disorders of all different kinds. And so we're glad to still be here. Benefix, believe it or not, was approved 25 years ago. And so Pfizer's been around a long time, and we have no aspersions of going anywhere. We're going to be around for a long time going to the future, and I'm hoping that I'm here with you as well. So with that, I will stop share, Bob, and say thank you for allowing us to be here once again, and look forward to a great meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Can everybody put on mute, or so that we don't have to mute everybody? Somebody. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna mute.
Keep elephants in our world. Visit WWFheals.org or call this number and symbolically adopt an elephant for just $12 a month. Your support will help WWF protect elephants and other threatened wild.
I just texted him, don't worry.
Or call in the next 5 minutes and we'll send you an adoption kit with this.
So our first speaker is Dr. Lisa Boggio from Rush. And again, Rush as one of the exhibitors and one of our sponsors for the year. That is the first thing that they're going to do is tell us a little bit about how Rush supports the community, and then Lisa will move into her presentation. So take it away, Dr. Boggio. Unmute. Do I have to unmute you? You can unmute yourself. Try. Okay, there we go. Did that give you the to unmute? There we go. Okay.
Which wasn't working.
Yes, I have that on mute, I guess, and I have it now.
It happened. I've gone through this before too. So, hi, I'm Lisa Boggio, hematologist at Rush. I'm here. Mindy Simpson is here, who is our pediatric hematologist, and John Ergo, who is our nurse. I'm an adult hematologist, and also some of our research staff is here. So we're at Rush. Rush is as we like to say, the largest hemophilia treatment center or bleeding disorder center in Illinois. We take care of both adults and children with bleeding disorders and clotting disorders too. So we have a pretty fantastic team that includes me and Dr. Simpson, but also John.
We lost you.
Got that, and I'm not sure about the microphone. I can hear it. I don't know if it helps you. Is it okay? I can't hear you, so you have to tell me if it's okay. Okay, thank you. Two social workers, Lucy Ramirez and Laura Spooner is our newer social worker, and we also have our lovely research staff, including Hinal Patel, who's on the call, Brian, Joe Boggio, and then one of our administrators is on, great administrator Josie Regalato, and as well Kim Casara. So how do we support things? Well, I think we really encourage people to be involved in the bleeding disorders community. We like to support by going to all the events and supporting the events through BDAI, as well as camp. I tend to spend the week at camp each year, except for the last two. And obviously, because there's that, but having walk, doing support, and getting ourselves involved in the challenges and trying to get all the people we see, as well as the people we work with, involved in supporting the bleeding disorders community. So that's really our goal. I think that's important for this support, because this organization is so important that we want to support that as much as possible. We also see every patient. We don't charge for our comprehensive care clinic, and that's part of our thing. I mean, if it's a new patient, we have to see them as a new patient, but our established patients, we want to avoid those changes that happen with insurance, that when you have one insurance, another year you have a different insurance, and we want to avoid those kind of disruptions in care by being able to provide that care to everyone, regardless of what happens. And there's lots of resources out there. We try to work with our pharmaceutical colleagues as well to provide that to our patients. And that's all I have to say.
I'd like to say one of the other thing is not only are you doing scientific research, but you've also started to do some like psychographic research, and a piece that we're going to release to the community soon is that Rush did a study with the National Hemophilia Foundation with the Black and African American community, and some really interesting results. And so we're going to work with Rush and BDAI and maybe even the Blood Bond Network to share those results first with the African American community and then with the whole community, because there was some really interesting. It looked at both from the patient's perspective and then from the treater's perspective, and it was. Congratulations for taking part in that. I think it's really good.
Lucy spearheaded that, so so you can thank.
It's really gonna for all of trying to help people. It's really some great information, and I think it's gonna help the entire community. So, and everybody.
The more we know about what we're doing or what we're not doing or what people need, the better off we're going to be. And we invite that feedback, because you're not necessarily always going to get that. And I think that that's important, because we don't know what we don't know until someone tells us.
Exactly. So it was really, and NHF just shared that with us as a chapter this week. So it was really cool. So thank you. So we're
Cool.
so we're here, Lisa, for you to tell us about the research pipeline.
Sure. It's not, you have to allow me to share my screen. It's almost like a Japanese film where Bob's mouth is going and the words come out at the end.
You are co-host now.
Okie dokie, thank you. I'm not as slick and have everything prepared as stuff like that. So there might be new, this is kind of about what studies are in the research that is currently ongoing. Just trying to open the slides. There it is. So basically just going to talk about clinical trials and bleeding disorders. There's got to be a lot more information after July because our big meeting is in July. But I tried to streamline this for things that are actually you may see coming soon. So I think that's important. But first, I think everybody has to understand what is a clinical trial. So this is the research studies that are done looking at different medications. And before we give medications to people, we have to make sure that they're safe and we have to make sure they're effective. So first they're treated in animals to make sure they're safe prior to testing in humans. And often these animals may have the condition that is being used to treat, like, for example, there are hemophilia dogs, we have hemophilia rats, we have mice, excuse me, be yelled at for that one. But we test these medications to make sure they're safe, and then we test them to make sure how effective they are, and we do that in human trials as well. So preclinical trials are usually the animal studies. And when we talk about different studies, there are different phases, right? So phase 1, medications are basically given to normal patients without the disorder that that's being investigated. So it's given to normal subjects, really to look to see if there's some side effects from it. And to see what doses may be effective in folks. So, but phase 2, then we go to the people who have the disorder and try to find the right dose that would be effective in the patients with the disorder. And the phase 3 is a comparative trial using the medication or treatment we have right now to the new treatment and seeing if one is better than the other or about the same, or that's just to make sure that that is working. So you have a product come that is going to be effective for folks. Also, let me know, Bob can probably pop in anytime and let me know if I'm going too fast or not explaining things well. So we're going to talk today about rebalancing therapies, factor 8 mimetics, a longer acting factor 8, and gene therapy. So the rebalancing therapies are tissue factor pathway inhibitor and an antithrombin inhibitor. And then we'll get to that. But the real point is balance, right? If you don't have a bleeding disorder, we bleed and we clot. We have this balance that if you get a cut, you're going to make a clot and you're going to stop bleeding, and it's always in balance. But if you have a bleeding disorder and you're missing a clotting factor, your natural clotting things or natural anticoagulants that are in your body are going to continue to work. So you're out of balance and you bleed. If you have a disorder where you make too much clotting factor, or you are missing some of the natural blood thinners, then you're going to have a clotting disorder. So that's the thing that the body gets out of balance. So a point of the rebalancing therapies is to restore things to balance. So in the case of a bleeding disorder, it's reducing the natural blood thinners so that the person who's missing factor 8 or 9 or whatever factor it is becomes back to even. So they stop the bleeding. So, this is a hematology thing. This is the coagulation cascade. We love the coagulation cascade as hematologists. It's like our favorite thing ever. I think only because we finally figured it out after years and nobody else knows what we're talking about. So what this is the fibrin clot is down here at the bottom, right? And this fibrin clot is is a pointer. Look at that, the fibrin clot. That's the clot that makes your blood clot and helps you to stop bleeding. But it starts up the top, right, where you get an injury and your tissue is exposed, and it activates factor 7, and then it activates factor 10, and then factor 10 goes on to make a clot. And then it gets more amplified, but with factor 8 and factor 9 to make more 10, and therefore you get more clot. So there's ways to stop that. There's something called antithrombin. Antithrombin inhibits the activation of factor 10. It's a natural blood thinner. So if you reduce that and you have low factor 8 sort of at the same level, or factor 9 at the same level, it's going to even it out and you'll still make a clot because you're not having imbalance between the two. There's another one called tissue factor pathway inhibitor, which is up here. Emicizumab is already on market, but there's another one called Mim8 that's in clinical trials now. That is something else. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there's even the other natural blood thinners, protein C and protein S, trying to inhibit those. Those are in preclinical studies, so we're not going to talk about them. But there are other things even further down the pipeline that you might hear about in the future. I know that was very complicated. Sorry. So tissue factor pathway inhibitor. So factor 10, because all the clotting factors are numbers, right? And we love Roman numerals because we're hematologists and we want to make things difficult. Factor 10 is prevented by being made by tissue factor pathway inhibitor. Now, I'm not going to say tissue factor pathway inhibitor all the time because it's too long, so we call it TFPI. And when TFPI is inhibited or the amount being used is decreased, you make more factor 10, so therefore you make more clot and therefore you stop bleeding. So this is a monoclonal antibody. It basically means it's made in the lab. It's given under the skin, subcutaneously as a shot under the skin, and it works in both factor 8 and factor 9 deficiencies with or without inhibitors. And it is been shown to be effective in reducing bleeding in factor 8-9 deficiency with or without inhibitors, and there's studies for that. But just so you can see how it works, right? Here you go, you got up here, you got factor 7 comes along and takes a nice big bite out of factor 10, and factor 10 runs away and starts trying to make clot, right? Well, here down the bottom thing, factor 7 is trying to bite factor 10, but mom comes along and, you know, tells you not to do that or ties you up. And with this is the TFPI, right? And it gets stuck to it. So when that's stuck to it, the factor 10 can't run away, it has to sit there. So therefore an extra clot is not being made. And these are the studies. This is just a graphic of the studies. So there are different companies that have made them. Bayer had one, it's been discontinued, so it's not progressing. Concizumab from Novo Nordisk, Marstacimab, see, I can't even see the names either, so don't feel bad, from Pfizer, and then Green Cross, which is a Korean company, is making another one. And they're all they're all antibodies that are going against things. The problem with these is that, and they've had different studies, but there's been some problems with the studies. First, in the Bayer study, there were 3 blood clots, and the one was a central nervous system or a brain blood clot. And so that basically the study ended up being terminated. They decided not to continue to develop this particular product. And it might have been because, you know, it involved more of the TFPI. TFPI has K1, 2, and 3 sites. So concizumab they had 24 subjects in their phase 1 and 2 studies. There's a phase 3 study as well. There were no blood clots, but there were anti-drug antibodies that developed in some people. And you have to remember, all these people who were tested were previously treated patients. These are not new or untreated patients, like little babies. The Pfizer, similar one, had some anti-drug antibodies. And then the Green Cross, I don't have any information about because it's still the phase 1, so an earlier study is still ongoing. You're going to be hearing more and more about these products, and they're given under the skin at different rates. Some of them were given daily. There were studies that were being given once a week, once every 2 weeks, different time periods to see what the optimal time is to give for people, what the best way is for people to be treated, and different times that they get treated. So some might be daily infusions, some might not be. might be weekly, might be more. But these are the studies where it is now. We're very likely to see more of this coming up in the very near future, because the phase 3 studies, or the more advanced studies, are likely to be presented in the next year, within the next year, likely. We have another one. And we've had, and actually I forgot to say, we've also had several patients on these studies. On the TFPI studies, we at Rush have been, I'm sure most of the other HTCs in Illinois have had patients on these studies, and they have overall done, very well. So it's a lot to, I think I'll take this point, it's a lot for someone to want to help folks out by trying to make their lives easier by participating in these clinical studies, and that's very altruistic of them. And they also sometimes do very well on studies because they get a lot of free visits and things like that. The other one that's really likely to be going to be seen soon is it's fitusiran. So fitusiran, it acts against antithrombin. I told you antithrombin is a very strong anticoagulant that the body normally makes, right? Your body normally makes that. People with antithrombin deficiency get lots of blood clots. But this is a once a month under the skin administration, which works in both factor 8, 9 deficiencies with or without inhibitors. So it does really well. There's been a bunch of different studies, and I have here the phase 1 through 3 studies. And really it reduces the antithrombin activity by 80%. So it gets people down to a fairly low level, about 20% of the normal antithrombin activity. And if you have severe hemophilia, that sort of balances it out so people don't bleed, right? So it takes, and you can see the ABR, which stands for annualized bleeding rate. How many bleeds did they have? That it goes to reduce their annual bleeding rate to basically one to 2 bleeds per year. And a lot of them, the phase 3, as you can see here, they compared the prophylaxis, so regular therapy, to those people who are still on factor on demand. And really the bleeding rate was basically no bleeding or very little bleeding in a few people versus per year having 16 to 20 bleeds. So this was in the inhibitor patients, and this is the non-inhibitor patients. And now the study is going on with longer use. This one's an extension study. So they finished the phase 3, but they're giving it to people for a long time. We've had 3 patients on it now for like 3-4 years, and they've done very well with it. The side effects that have been found is that the liver function tests in some people have gone up, and there's been people who have had gallstones. So they had, gallbladder disease, and they had to have that taken care of, or surgery or something done for the gallstones. Over time, especially in our older patients, the doses had to go down. It started at 80 milligram dose. Now we have people on 20 milligrams every other month, or 50 milligrams every other month, or every month. So everybody watch the levels, and you see where they are. And if they're doing okay, if their levels are going down, we just reduce the dose. So they need less and less over time. And that's what we're learning about a bit now. That's where we're at with this one. So this is exciting because once a month under the skin, fairly easy to give, and it's given in one of the auto injector pens. So that also makes it fairly simple. It comes in a little cartridge that you stick in and just use the auto injector. So that's nice. Okay, I've lost my ability to move. Let's go back to this. Sorry, there we go. So since we reduced the natural blood thinner, if someone has a bleed, you don't want to give them the normal dose of factor. So as you know, if you have a factor 8 deficiency, if you have a bleed, we want to give somebody 25 or 30 units per kilo to treat that bleed. But the dose is cut down by a third, right? It's similar for factor 9. We'd want to give someone 40 or 50 units per kilo. We go down to 20. The same thing with the FIBA or Novo 7. the doses of the breakthrough bleed treatment is much lower because you're already in a state where you're a little bit more prone to clots. So you don't need as much to have as much effect. So it really reduces the amount of factor that someone has to take. Here's another one, it's called MIM8. MIM8 is a factor 8 mimetic. So people have already heard about, we talked last time about Hemophilia being a factor 8 mimetic, or as I call it, fake 8. It looks like 8. It causes clotting like factor 8, but it doesn't do everything factor 8 does. And it's not as efficient as factor 8. You need a lot of these mimetics to make the effect that factor 8 has with a tiny little bit amount. So this is given under the skin, and the studies were with people with or without inhibitors, and they were taking it for prevention therapy. It has an auto-injector pen. That's an advantage because I don't know if anybody, with diabetes, but these diabetic patients, they have these auto-injector pens that they can dial the dose onto their insulin and then have it inject. So it's a very nice way to give medication and have it easy for people to do. It comes in little cartridges as well. And there's a study called Frontier 1, that study is in progress. Official information has not been shared with it, but we have a couple patients on that too. Here's one that likely we'll be seeing sooner rather than later, which is once a week intravenous factor 8, and it's called BIV001. So this is basically based on eloctate as the main product, which is this. This is eloctate. This is factor 8. This is what factor 8 looks like, okay? And it is bound to a tiny little bit of von Willebrand factor. So as you know, factor 8 is protected by von Willebrand factor. And without von Willebrand factor, it just gets destroyed instantly, which is why the type 3 von Willebrand patients bleed just like severe factor 8 deficiency. So they're very similar. And then it is surrounded by this little protein cloud to help it protect it and last a bit longer. When they studied it in mice, it had a 30-hour half-life. So to put that in perspective, actually I'll go to this one. To put that in perspective, the half-life of regular factor 8 is 7 to 12 hours, right? So the half-life means you give the dose, half of it is gone 12 hours later. It takes usually 4 to 5 half-lives for your drug to be totally gone. So if your half-life is only 7 to 12 hours for your product, that's why 48 hours later you have to dose again because you're back down to 0. The extended half-life factor 8 had a half-life of about 16 hours. Much longer, prolonged half-life, but still, and you could say that, see the days post-dose, right? So here's your less than 1%, here's your 1%. So at day 2 for regular factor 8, you're at less than 1%. On day 3, you're actually at 3%. So day 3.5 to 4 is when it gets to less than 1%. But this BIV001 gets to 5% 5 days later. So the half-life of this was 32 hours. And when they looked at studies in adults with this was a phase 1-2 study. They combined them both a little bit. And they did one was a single dose study, and another study was giving the product every week and that's to see if your factor levels go up too high or it accumulates. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So with the different doses, really we just want to look at the bottom line here, right? At 7 days with the dose, the factor 8 activity was 5%, with just a small dose, the 25 units per kilo. If they gave a single dose of a higher amount, about 65 units per kilo, it was 17% at 7 days. The repeat dose, if you gave dose continuously, 50 units per kilo, which is similar to our very doses that we give for our extended half-life products, it was at 10% at 7 days, and same thing if they give a little higher dose. So the dose that they started looking at is this 50 units per kilo dose. We currently have, they're currently doing the study in children to see how they respond to this product as well. And that is wrapping up now. We have several patients on that one as well. And so far it's very exciting because if you have this, I can measure your factor VIII level, which I can't do with the factor VIII mimetics. You can take the same product to treat a bleed. You don't need a second product in the house. And it is a true once a week IV. So you're still giving it once a week, but it's a true once a week product for factor VIII. We have a lot of once a week products for factor IX. We just don't have them for factor VIII. So I did that. And then I have to show the coagulation cascade again, but the more simplified version of what we've talked about, right? So if you make a blood clot, which is down here, we're trying to inhibit the rebalancing ones or inhibiting antithrombin and TFPI to make the clot happen. And so those are how that works. So, and then the other mimetics are giving things back. Mimetics are just like the other ones, giving factor VIII back and trying to make the clot happen, or you just give factor VIII or factor IX back. So the next one is gene therapy. So now the original thing was for me to talk about the cure for hemophilia. Unfortunately, I can't talk to you about a cure for hemophilia because there isn't one. Gene therapy is a longer acting therapy. It is not a cure. Especially it's not a cure for a lot of different things, but there's still a lot of work to be done with gene therapy, and they're still in clinical trials. However, there may be product presented to the FDA again to see if it's effective. So BioMarin, probably furthest along, it uses a little, I always like to talk about the olive with the blue cheese stuffed olives, right? So you have this little shell, and the shell says go to the liver. And that's a little like the olive, right? And then you sort of stuff the factor in there. That's like the blue cheese. So you stuff it in and you put it into someone's body, and it goes to the liver, and the factor VIII goes into the liver and goes into the cells of the liver and starts making factor VIII, right? And that's what this is about. And the same thing with factor IX, when it was a factor IX gene therapy study. They tried all different doses in the earlier studies. But, and it has a name that I can't pronounce, and I'm not going to try. At the different doses, though, they had really good response. So at the higher dose, this is the factor activities, right? The highest dose patients, 170% factor VIII activity, which is a little scary for me because we know that levels above 150 people tend to have blood clots. So, but this is a good response. These are the days, right? So they went up quite quickly. But over time, as you see here, they keep dropping. At the lower dose, the levels go up, but not as high. But still, we're talking about an average of 20 to 30% factor activity. But still, the levels over time have gone down. So this company tried to present to the FDA before, but they asked for more information. So I would expect that they're going to try to present their updated data more recently. The most recent meeting we've had is World Federation of Hemophilia meeting, but I didn't see a lot of that presented there. So this will be probably have newer information updated we have a fancy meeting in July that we'll have more information about. So we'll have to see how long it lasts. Because the problem with gene therapy is you give it once, then your body says, "Ooh, I have antibodies against that virus vector, that shell." So you can't get it again. So it's a one and done. So if you had something that lasted 5 years and you get a booster and keep going, or you had something, it doesn't matter how long it lasts, really, a year or 2 years, whatever it is, and you could boost it again, then that would be fine. It'd be a very long acting therapy. But right now we don't have that. So this is a little tough because when it runs out or when you lose your effect, you have to go back to doing your infusions at this point in time. And so those are some hurdles that have to be fixed, or have a plan on how to fix them before we can really move on and find this to be a really effective therapy for everyone. However, when people on these studies were using it in the first couple of years, they did have a big reduction in their bleeding. This is annualized bleeding rate. Annualized infusions is this one, and this is the higher dose group and the lower dose group, but still in the couple of years afterwards, there was really a reduction in how much factor VIII they had to use, which really translates to how much bleeding they had afterwards. For factor IX, it's a bit more along. This is the historic part, though. This is an old study from 2011, but this is the original part of, well, not even original, because we started out with giving people factor IX a different way, but this was quite an exciting thing that they gave the subjects an hour infusion and they watched it for 6 hours and had different doses. And then they had watched their factor levels. So this is, if you look at this patient up here, this is their factor IX activity. They got up, this person got up to 5%, you know, hanging around 2%, but has sustained this 2%, right? And this is weeks. This is 5 years, 60, you know, 60 weeks, or they've had up to 10-year data now on this, and they've stayed steady. And these little arrows are when they had to get factor doses. So as you can notice that this person's factor dosing sort of fell off. They didn't need it as much. This person did. But the key is here is this person down here had a nice response, but then the liver didn't like it so much. They got a little hepatitis and it got irritated. And when the liver started getting irritated, the factor levels started dropping off. So they had to take steroids for many weeks to reduce that liver irritation and then be able to sustain the response, which has happened in this patient here. So it's very exciting because this really was the first gene therapy study for giving IV infusion of factor with the vector that really had a response. So, and therefore most of these 6 patients, 5 of them had no stop bleeding, had no spontaneous bleeding, but the problem was having this irritation in the liver. Now they had more subjects. They were able to get 5 to 7% factor IX activity. So changing them from a severe to a mild. So they try to figure out different ways to make this more effective, because 5% is still fairly low level and people still bleed with not even minor trauma. But there was the discovery of a young man from Padua who had very elevated factor IX activities, close to 700% factor IX activity, and found that he had this gene mutation that gave him a gain of function as factor IX. He had really super IX that was very, very effective, but he was clotting all the time because he had this very high factor IX. And therefore, a lot of the new studies now are using this factor IX. It's called factor IX Padua. The other issue I told you before is that, once again, 40% of the population in the United States has antibodies against the adenovirus vector. That's the shell that we're using. They're using other kind of shells. But those people who already have high antibodies are not likely to have a good effect from gene therapy because they're going to destroy all those antibodies, all those capsids. This is just another picture here that tells you different doses and looking for a dose response of all the different amounts. These are all different. This, if you don't remember scientific one, this is the lowest amount of how much of the capsids are being given, then the numbers go up. And then some people had really nice sustained response, but then some people didn't. And that's always an issue that we have to try to figure out why there's this difference between folks. But that's from that study overall. So here's the factor IX Padua. The factor IX is 8 times greater efficacy than normal factor IX. And now we're using it. And this is one that you're going to be hearing about, is this AMT 061, which is being likely you're going to hear a lot more about. This is one that they're using the factor IX Padua. And you can see the different participants that they did when they gave the dose to, that they're getting, this guy was 33% and these two are in the 50s. So we're going from 5% to 30 to 50%, which is great. Normal factor IX activity would be above 50%, but 30% people, those are the very mild hemophilia patients naturally, and we don't really see them bleed unless there's trauma or they have something that surgery or something the doctors do to them, basically. The other products, like for factor 7, there's a new factor 7, it's already on the market. There's preclinical studies too with longer acting von Willebrand factor and other kind of things, but I think they're still a little too early to have a lot of discussion about at this point. But other bleeding disorders are being looked at, are being evaluated as well, but they're a little not as further along. So I wanted to give you something that you're going to be hearing about fairly soon, if you haven't heard about them already, and that you might see different presentations about during some of the meetings or NHF, or if you have to go to that, that would be helpful. So that's it. So
Thanks. Let
hopefully
me
that was helpful in what you wanted. I mean, if it
Yeah,
didn't,
well,
need
I'm
something,
gonna-
let me know.
I'm gonna unmute. Hold on one second. Let me try and see if I can do this again. How the hell did I do it?
Someone, Morali asked, what are the, well, let me go back. Go back. Okay. Welcome. Thank you. Who makes MIM8? MIM8 is a Novo Nordisk product. That is a study that is sponsored by Novo Nordisk. They also make insulin stuff. So that's why they're really expert with those pen injectors, which is great. And Novo Nordisk already told you that. Isn't that exciting? And then the exclusions of gene therapy. Well, inhibitors are one of the exclusions at this point, although there is a study trying to look at that. Blood Center Wisconsin, or Versity as they're now called, has a study for patients with inhibitors. It's basically a bone marrow transplant kind of study that they're seeing if they can treat people with inhibitors. The other thing is antibody levels. The interesting thing about that AMT study, the Factor IX study, was that the way we measured the antibodies changed, and a lot of the people who still responded had antibodies that were detectable. What level of antibody against the vector is something that I don't know. That's what we have to figure out, who's not going to respond for that. People can have had hepatitis or HIV. They just have to be well controlled. And actually, they all have to be over 18 because livers in children have not finished growing. So if you gave something that gave someone 50% factor 9 activity or factor 8 activity, and then they grow, as they grow, it's going to get diluted out because the liver is going to all the cells are just going to take over. So there's that. And which steroid is given after gene therapy? It's prednisone. It's our standard little prednisone stuff that nobody liked, and they were giving it for weeks to months, if you can imagine. So sort of like after a transplant, after an organ transplant, we give people steroids for quite some time, or immune suppression drugs for quite some time. So it's a similar kind of a thing.
How do I unmute everybody?
You can unmute all. There should be a thing on your thing to say unmute all. Because you have a mute all, you can unmute all.
Yeah, I don't have that.
Is there a ... at your participant list? Look at your participant list. So click on participant list,
It's
not
just
the pictures.
invites.
Not on the, and there's a invite, mute all, and there's a ...
There's just one dot, and it says ask all to unmute, mute participants, allow.
Yeah, so you can do that, unmute all. Ask
Where-
all to unmute. You just said it.
So will that allow people? Are you unmuted? Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
There
they
we
can
go.
unmute
Okay.
themselves.
There we go.
So the question was immune modulation through bone marrow transplant tried before? Yes, it has been tried before. And but there's better treatments for bone marrow transplant than there were in the past. Non-myeloablation, they used to, we used to do a real bone marrow transplant and destroy their bone marrow and give them all their marrow back, give them new bone marrow back. And now it's not as intense. Therefore, people did not have, because it was like a fairly good 10% mortality to do a bone marrow transplant from infection. So this is actually a little less intense. So it's this non-myeloablative transplant. You need people to unmute again. You mute everybody once and then it remuted.
You need to allow people to unmute. You unmuted everyone once, but if we remuted, okay, so let's try again. Ask all to unmute. Did that work, Mindy?
Yep.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I was gonna say, I unmuted the first time, but then I put it on mute and it doesn't allow you to do
Oh,
it.
you can't do that.
It's
So if you
allowing.
unmute, you can't remute, because if you mute again, you have to ask permission to get unmuted.
Just
Yeah, you-
ask me and I will, because, and I'll learn. Natalie, text me and tell me what to do.
Yeah, I think there's an allowing thing that needs to happen because you
Yeah,
don't
and
want
just because it
everybody
doesn't
to-
say unmute all, that I could ask everybody to mute themselves once I've got it in, so I apologize. And I'm my tech person tonight, so, okay. They are finishing finals tonight, so wish Noel the best on finishing finals. So, I did have a question, because we're entering the world of ultra rares, and we've started and kind of, and you said that a lot of that isn't far along, but we may have a few people on here from our ultra rare support group, and we are, BDAI and the board are really interested in kind of supporting that community. So just what is the hope for those, like some of those conditions that there is no treatment right now? And
Well,
maybe
there's
that's
very
late of
few-
asking everybody.
There's very few that have no treatment.
Right.
Factor 11, there is a factor 11 concentrate in other parts of the world. They have been looking to try to get into the United States, though some of them, there's some side effects of that can be an issue for some people. But, and the other thing is to know that some people have, somebody asked me about they were using Hemophilia in von Willebrand disease, which seems to go against my thought process here, but the rebalancing therapies could be used in any bleeding disorder because they're not specific for factor 8 or factor 9.
It's
They're
interesting.
for any coagulation bleeding disorder, not platelet. I wouldn't think the platelet disorders necessarily. I don't know about that, but at least the clotting factor disorders can be used for all of them because it's rebalancing things and getting rid of the natural blood thinners that make people more that sort of aid the bleeding.
And is anybody working at that right now?
People have been doing those. I have heard of people doing investigator-initiated studies to evaluate the efficacy of these products in those groups. However, their focus is to try to get them, the company's focus is to try to get them approved for their initial indication, which would be factor 8 and 9 deficiency, and then to expand it. Just like there are 2 other factor 7 products that one's on the market and one is being studied, but they were all studied for hemophilia with inhibitors versus in not congenital factor 7 deficiency or platelet disorders.
Okay.
Hey, Dr. Boggio, I have a quick question. What about someone with acquired hemophilia?
There is a study that we are getting up and running. It's also another investigator-initiated study that is going to be for using emicizumab or Hemlibra for acquired hemophilia.
Is it the balancing again?
No. It's
Okay.
Emicizumab.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Libra.
Okay.
So using that, and in the meantime, the difference with acquired hemophilia, if people don't know this, that it's an autoantibody.
Yeah.
It's an autoimmune disease, kind of like rheumatoid arthritis or something, except it's not attacking people's joints, it's attacking their factor 8. So that happens in older patients, and but they have a lot of bleeding, and therefore we treat them with immune suppression, but also to stop the bleeding, we give them factor, usually FIBA or Novo-7, but we have a study that's looking at using the Hemlibra for those patients. Because you can imagine, actually, the difficulty with those acquired hemophilia patients is that insurance won't cover factor for them because it's hard to get. You know how expensive factor is, and they don't want to give it to people. they'd rather have them be in the hospital until we get the inhibitor down.
You were talking about the gene therapy and kind of falling off over time and not, one of the interesting questions is why. I wondered if we are genotyping everybody that's in studies.
No.
Okay.
So genotype, we have the genetic. Everybody who's in studies, we're getting their genetic information, but it doesn't seem to, it's not necessarily related to their gene mutation.
Okay, so it's not in, so that's not in.
That's factor 9. I mean, the problem is it's really that the cells for the factor 8 is the difficult one. Factor 9, it's been sustained levels for 10 years. That's not a problem. So the factor 9, because it's a small molecule, it goes into the liver cell and just stays there. The difference is the factor 8 is kind of big, and it kind of, if you think about it, makes the body gets rid of those fat liver cells, and so it's loss of the liver cells that have the factor 8 in it over time. That's the bigger issue.
That's the
so
bigger issue.
It's a little tricky. I mean, they're trying to use a smaller factor 8 because the Hemophilia, which is a smaller factor 8, because they put the different parts, they got rid of the intermediate part and stuck little bits together to make it a little more squishy, a little smaller, that, they're trying to find different kinds of factor 8 that would make it smaller. So it makes it easier, but still it's a really big gene.
So it really isn't genetics or cultural or anything like that. It's more just about the size of the gene, the size of that molecule.
It seems to be. There might be other things that I don't know of. Things that I don't know about, but
no, but we're just.
But all our studies pretty much give people free genetic testing for their bleeding disorder. You got to remember, if you are interested in that, remember there's ATHN-10. For the rare bleeding disorders, you can get your genetic testing through ATHN-10 study.
Can you tell more people about that? Because, and I would like to get information to spread about that, because a lot of people don't know about ATHN-10.
Yeah, it's on the ATHN website. So if you go to ATHN.org, you should be able to see that. And it is genotyping for the rare disorders, not factor 8 or factor 9.
For rare.
But for Glanzmann thrombocythemia, the factor 10s and 13s. Some companies actually give you free the factor 13 deficiency. You can get genetic testing, usually because it's a product that you have to kind of know it a little bit. But you can get those gene testings done. But for those people who don't have insurance that cover genetic testing, which a lot of us don't, which is why we don't automatically test every single person that we see, then we can get that for the 7s and the 10s, and the 11s are all included in that. And even the factor 1, the more rare factor 1, factor 13, factor 2 deficiencies, that we have them all. They're all different deficiencies and much more rare. The most common ones of our bleeding disorders are von Willebrand disease, but it's not included in that. But factor 8 and factor 9, there's other ways to get genetic testing for them. It's not included in ATHN-10. There are companies who do sponsor some factor genetic testing. Remember, we had My Life, Our Future was through ATHN, and a lot of people took advantage of that to find out who in the family had the gene mutation. So we tested the family member who had hemophilia, and then maybe their aunts and cousins or sisters. Always nice to know if your sister has it for the future.
Cool. I wanted to ask, as we're getting these alternative treatments, you know what, I'll save that question because Dr. Roberts is on. So is there any other final questions for Dr. Roberts? Because I think that is good for everybody. Okay. So,
and I think that's why I just talked about clinical trials, because I know he's going to talk about what we're doing now. And it's very important. And I think Jim Herster put the whole link into what ATHN-10 is. And Mindy Simpson put in ATHN.org. So in the chat, you can see.
So it's in the chat, guys.
You want to look at.
Are there any other final questions for Dr. Boggio?
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned July being a benchmark of important dates. What is the significance of July?
The International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis will be in
Got it.
London, July 10th, 9th through 10th.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's where we get all our, that's where all
Right
the
on.
studies are going to be presented. We'll see the
Mhm.
latest data. It'll be very exciting.
Right on. Thank you.
And where is that this year?
London.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not, I'll do it virtually though. But that's okay. And then some of that you'll see at National Hemophilia Foundation will have some of this information too, but
Mhm.
really they can't tell us anything until they present at the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis, or ISTH meeting.
Mhm.
They have to wait for that. There's usually a moratorium on things or until the publication goes through.
Yep.
You can't tell people about stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, Dr. Roberts, are you? There you are, sir. How are you tonight?
Good.
Good. Thank you for being here.
Yep, my pleasure. Let me I can share my slide deck here.
Let me make you a co-presenter. So for everybody who doesn't know, Dr. Roberts is the co-director at the Bleeding and Clotting Disorders Institute in Peoria, which is our standalone treatment center for everywhere south of Peoria and
Chicago.
South of, yeah, everywhere south of I-80. I'm sorry, I was looking and thinking, I was looking at your slides already. So sorry, Jonathan.
No worries.
I like how Becky says it. Everything south of I-80. But it's part of the Illinois team too. On top of everything else, and I know he doesn't mind, Dr. Roberts also has a bleeding disorder himself. So I always appreciate when he's presenting, because not only is he telling from a doctor's perspective, but he's telling from a patient's perspective. So it's a thank you, Jonathan, as always,
Sure.
for being here. So
Sure. Yeah, happy to contribute to tonight. And so I know that Lisa went over kind of the current treatment landscape. And so I'm gonna take just a little bit of a different spin on it and not belabor, speaking about the various new developments, but really, kind of from a patient perspective, looking at the lay of the land and, how you can consider some of the making treatment decisions with your care team regarding all of the new developments that are occurring. So
yeah, there are raw egg yolks in it.
So I hear some background noise too, so apologies for that. So let's look at hemophilia treatment as a representation of how therapy has evolved over time. So, in the 1950s and 70s, from a patient and provider perspective, the historical goal of treatment was to replace deficient clotting factors to treat the bleeding episodes. Okay, so in that era, we really didn't have a lot of good therapies, and just getting bleeding to stop was really the overall goal.
That's not fair. Whoa.
So can I ask it? Sorry if there's a little background noise. If I'll be happy to take questions, but if you're don't have a question, if you can mute yourself, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Usually they're those tiny things.
It doesn't matter, but
Yes, because think of how much meat is in there.
Okay.
I get
So the modern goal of treatment, moving from the 80s to 2000s, has been to replace deficient clotting factors with safer products and to prevent bleeding episodes with prophylaxis to reduce the annualized bleeding rate. So again, as we moved into having better therapeutics, we started to look towards having prophylaxis and actually preventing bleeds. And then as we move into, Bob, I don't know if you can mute everyone.
yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, I'm just, thank you. I need to go back. So, okay, thank you.
Are you gonna answer?
Laura Spooner, could you please mute?
Um,
I'm very sorry about that. Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay.
okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks. So, and, you know, moving into the future from really the 2010s and beyond is really what Dr. Boggio was speaking of, with improving effectiveness, duration of action, moving towards extended half-life, non-factor therapies, gene therapy, and ultimately moving hopefully towards a cure. So just a little historical perspective, because I think it's important. You know, I actually, both of my uncles had severe hemophilia A, and, you know, they received treatment in that 1950s to 70s era. And unfortunately, they, you know, passed away from HIV and ultimately AIDS because there wasn't good treatment. So moving historically, it was just, if you have a bleed, be able to treat it and to do that safely. Moving into the more modern era, and then now moving into kind of cutting edge therapy to really look at lifestyle and treatment goals of both the patient and provider, and really try to live a life with no bleeds at all. So here's another representation, just looking at a historical perspective. So in the 1950s, it was really whole blood or fresh frozen plasma transfusions, moving into the development of cryoprecipitate, lyophilized or plasma-derived concentrates, and then all the safety developments with solvent and detergent treatment, and then some viral inactivation, like with hepatitis viruses and parvovirus, and then moving into the longer acting half-lives and non-factor hemostatic agents. And as Dr. Boggio was mentioning too, inhibitors have been a challenge and continue to be in our treatment. So again, from a patient perspective, the 1950s and 70s, someone living with hemophilia was really treat my bleeds and keep me out of the hospital. You know, when I speak to some of our patients that have lived through that era, that are you know, still with us, they have many stories of being in the hospital for weeks and sometimes months with bad bleeds that weren't able to be treated at that time. So in the era that I grew up in, we really were looking at safety, making factor safe, and keep me out of the ER. My early life was really spent in and out of emergency departments until learning how to do home infusions when I was about 10 years old. But still, prophylaxis wasn't really part of our paradigm here in the US. It was in Europe, but not here in the US. So, you know, tried to do sports in an era without prophylaxis was challenging, and my joints tell the tale today. And so really trying to prevent bleeds became more on the horizon. And now we are looking at personalization of therapy, making factor last longer, treat me without so many needle sticks, and ultimately a cure, right? Persistent concern, don't get an inhibitor. All right, and so again, just a historical perspective. From a therapeutic standpoint, Dr. Judith Graham-Poole in 1964 discovered cryoprecipitate. For the first time, factor VIII levels could approach 30%. Bleeds were stopped more quickly, and suddenly every local blood bank could offer some effective treatment for hemophilia A, and life expectancy increased. Moving towards, again, what I'm sure Dr. Boggio discussed, the concentrates, the purity that we mentioned, and development of ultimately recombinant factor products. For the kind of standard products, we've moved through multiple different generations, moving first to first generation recombinant products that had animal or human plasma derived proteins in the cell culture medium, second generation that they are present but then removed, and then third generation where they are completely animal and human plasma derived protein free, which is a majority of what the therapeutics are that we use today. These cell lines, as you're probably aware, are made in Chinese hamster ovary, baby hamster kidney, or human embryonic kidney cells. And the treatment paradigm has shifted, right, to bleed prevention and prophylaxis. So we do also have, as Dr. Boggio was speaking about, extended half-life and newer factor concentrates. There have been new approaches in protein structure and manufacturing. Some were specifically designed for half-life extension and may last a little bit longer than standard half-life products. And then we have non-factor replacement therapies and gene therapy. So besides the therapies, what else is important in regards to making treatment decisions? So we know that prophylaxis can prevent joint hemorrhage and subsequent arthropathy or joint damage, developing target joints and disability. And all of our major societies, including, you know, MASAC with NHF, WFH, and the World Health Organization, recommend that optimal therapy for people with severe hemophilia and bleeding disorders really is prophylaxis. And so now we're looking at preventing, not just treating bleeds, but treating and preventing bleeds. And the challenges have been and continue to be frequent infusions, venous access, adherence, and cost. So patient adherence. So we hear a lot about the cool advances that are made in the biochemistry of the different treatments and how long they last in the body, individual pharmacokinetics, even non-factor therapies that are maybe subcutaneous instead of intravenous. But patient adherence is really important. So we've moved from all of those hospitalization and ER management to home management, which is the standard of care. Kind of traditional factor prophylaxis is regularly scheduled factor infusions. And we know that younger patients or even older patients with difficult intravenous access may need things like implantable venous access devices, which are of concern for infection and malfunction and even thrombosis. I've taken care of, unfortunately, more than one patient that's had clot develop at either PICC line or Metaport sites in people that have bleeding disorders, hemophilia and otherwise. And then there's non-adherence issues. And this is really getting at the patient aspect. So when you look at the studies about non-adherence, meaning, patients are always prescribed a particular therapy, but do they actually do what the doctor says? I mean, I can tell you from a patient standpoint that that's not always the case, right? We have real lives, we have real things that happen in our lives, and it can be difficult to adhere to the optimal regimen. So really, if you look at the incidence from different surveys and other studies, around 20 to 50% of patients will be non-adherent at some point in their life, depending on their age. Tends to increase with age, and it's associated with more missed days of work, school, breakthrough bleeding, and target joint bleeds. So really, as an individual with a bleeding disorder, you need to think, how is my care team trying to help me? And what am I doing to be part of that team? And how can I actually help myself by listening to them and working with them and looking at a particular treatment regimen for my bleeding disorder? So how do we improve patient adherence? So we know that improved patient adherence comes from having a positive relationship with your Hemophilia Treatment Center, hematologists, and nursing staff. So, centers like Dr. Boggio at Rush and Dr. Berkovitz at Northwestern and ours at BCDI, we exist for you. We exist for the patients, and developing a good relationship with us actually helps with adherence to your therapy. Also, having a belief that prophylaxis is necessary. So this is a kind of a psychological thing as a patient that you have to come to terms with, understanding that, these are the cards you were dealt. You have a severe bleeding disorder. You need to have prophylaxis, and that it's an important part of your life. I mean, it can be tough. Some medicines, when you take them, they may make you, quote unquote, feel better, like if it's a pain medicine or something like that. But with hemophilia or other, bleeding disorders that require preventative therapy, it can be tough because you don't necessarily feel a tangible benefit other than you're not bleeding. So you need to kind of have that realization that prophylaxis is a necessity. It's important. Similarly, you need to accept that you have a bleeding disorder. I, a long time ago, obviously accepted that I have hemophilia and decided that to cope with the disorder for myself and to, help others to become a physician scientist and help patients with hemophilia and do research to try to improve life for all of us with bleeding disorders. Improved adherence also comes if there's have a good perception of planning and infusing skills, right? So you have to be able to administer the medicine. And unfortunately, right now, everything short of patients that are going through gene therapy trials that maybe only need to infuse now and then if they have a planned surgery, or even non-factor therapies like we have with emicizumab, that's the only non-factor therapy on the market. You still need to have some kind of infusing skills if there's a major trauma, right? And our goal is obviously to help minimize that need, but all patients, in my opinion, who have hemophilia or a severe bleeding disorder that requires frequent infusion, you need to have those skills. Not just you, other family members close to you, so that if something happens to you, you can't advocate for yourself, that they can still give you the emergency care you need. And then recognizing the need for personalization of hemophilia and patient-reported outcomes. So this is not just about the annualized bleeding rate. So the annualized bleeding rate is what we talk to you about in clinic for how many bleeds have you had in the last 6 months or the last year since we saw you, and we can make a calculation. And really, these annualized bleed rates, a lot of it, we rely on you, the patient, right? I mean, we know when we experience a bleed, unless you're in the emergency department with an active, obvious bleed or admitted to the hospital, a lot of the data that we have on annualized bleed rate comes from patient reporting. You know, we have to trust each other that what you're experiencing truly is a bleed. And that, you know, can become difficult, say, if you have pre-existing joint disease and you don't know if it's a bleed or arthritis. And that's where some of these other modalities like musculoskeletal ultrasound are important. And treatment centers are moving towards having that as an option. So really kind of taking a step back, just looking at what's kind of in our toolbox currently for bleeding disorder therapies that's on the market right now. So not talking about all the new stuff. So we have standard half-life concentrates, plasma-derived and recombinant. We have extended half-life factor concentrates for hemophilia A and B, non-factor replacement therapies, gene therapies that are moving towards approval and in kind of final stages of therapy trials, bypassing agents, so meaning like recombinant factor 7 or prothrombin complex concentrates, antifibrinolytics. So these may be used for like mucous membrane bleeding, certainly for people with von Willebrand disease, or like someone with hemophilia that may have like wisdom teeth taken out, heavy periods, things like that. We use these medications, nosebleeds. Hormone therapies, so really with having excessive menstrual bleeding, desmopressin or DDAVP, which now there is some limited supply of intranasal desmopressin again, and hopefully that will continue to be an option. Platelet transfusions, if you have platelet function problems, fresh frozen plasma, cryoprecipitate, these are kind of blood bank at the hospital type therapies, and then vitamin K. All right, so we have a whole host of bleeding disorder therapies. So then how do we make our individual treatment decisions being someone that has hemophilia? So like I mentioned, it's more than just your annualized bleed rate. We've really started to look at how can patients be engaged in making treatment decisions? How can we get the patient's voice represented in some of these patient-reported outcomes? So patient-reported outcomes is a term that industry uses, our pharmaceutical company colleagues, we use as researchers, and we're looking at what patients experience in their day-to-day life. You know, things like even your mental health, missed days of work in school, being able to be employed, activities of daily living, annualized bleed rate, all these different things go into patient-reported outcome. So recently this year, myself and some colleagues reported a study we did through our center and a few other centers in the US and Canada, looking at incorporating the patient voice and patient engagement in GoalHeme, which is a patient-centric patient-reported outcome measure, okay? And this really is looking at something that we're hoping will be more and more incorporated in hemophilia management, where patients will work with the treatment center to set goals that are important to them, and that the treatment centers can track these goals. So for example, from the paper, this is this is one of the common type of goals. So independent self-care management. So you with your treatment center can set this goal. So in this example, that you will occasionally set your own reminder to self-infuse on your cell phone, and that you will do it. Okay, so that's what we want you to do. And with your treatment team, you can look at all the different options. So you occasionally do. So this is where, so right now you're not doing it, right? And so you want to do it occasionally, and you can set what occasionally means for you, with your treatment center. So does that mean once a week? Does that mean twice a week? What's your goal? So somewhat better than expected would be that you usually set it. The best you could do would be you always do. Mom never needs to remind you that you need to have your own reminders to self-infuse and do it. And then you can measure if you're doing this worse or much worse than expected. And with your treatment team using this type of strategy, you can actually set individual goals that are important to you in hemophilia. And what this study was doing was, myself and other colleagues looked at many different, kind of think of it as like a menu of options that you could use to choose from of how you want to improve your life having a bleeding disorder. And these can be tailored to the individual to fit your own particular needs. And then after you set your treatment goal with your provider, then you can look at a scoring system. There's an algorithm based on how well you are doing based on the goals that you set to look at how you're improving your life in hemophilia. And this can be set over a period of time in the feasibility study. So the study we did before this one that I'm talking about, we did it over 12 weeks in total. So we had patients, we touched base with them at 6 weeks and then at 12 weeks. So, that's a short time frame. And we looked to see how they could accomplish these goals. And we did over the phone follow-up. And we showed that patients were actually able to improve their life with hemophilia. So you can see the types of goals. So again, when I'm talking about things that are beyond just your annualized bleeding rate. So we're talking about hemophilia management. These are some of kind of the domains: being able to administer factor on your own, being adherent, planning for procedures, following a treatment plan, hemophilia care planning, weight, exercise and nutrition, dealing with bleeds, and impact on life, relationships with family, engagement in sports, your self-esteem, depression, your feelings of anger or sadness, work attendance, narcotic use, many things that were ourselves as investigators and patients that we engaged for the study worked as a team to try to determine what was important to people living with a bleeding disorder, and particularly people that had hemophilia. And so this is just kind of a snapshot from this study of patient feedback. These are things that patients said about being involved in a process, about using patient-centric language, if I can say that. But some of the things that people were saying about using a tool like this to improve their care: it empowers patients, caregivers through goal setting, recognizing patient voices in the management of hemophilia is excellent. It's about time. I think GoalHeme could help patients with the disease. I think is promising. Seems like a good way to accomplish goals, even though they were not medical related. Thought it was interesting. So you can see there's a lot of different good feedback from the patients that were involved. And these are really us trying to capture your voice, capture our voice, and look at ways that we can improve our management of hemophilia in a way that's meaningful to us. So how this is moving forward, actually, and I don't have this on a particular slide, I think, but Athen actually has a new app called Robust Health. And this GoalHeme is actually incorporated into Robust Health. And it's with the goal to have patients all across the country using this app, being able to use this goal setting, use the tools that we developed through the GoalHeme study to really empower, have a sense of empowerment and have a way to improve the quality of life with having a bleeding disorder, and working with their treatment centers to do this. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit about kind of a patient-centric aspect of things. This actually, I really like, this paper came out as proceedings from World Federation of Hemophilia meeting that actually just wrapped up the other day in Montreal. And I think like Dr. Boggio, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend in person because I'm actually on inpatient service right now, taking care of people in the hospital. But this is a paper that Amy Shapiro, one of our colleagues in Indiana, helped with a team looking at kind of an overall state of what hemophilia management is right now. And you can see at different areas in the coagulation cascade, there are and are developing many options. So you can actually see these different asterisks by all these different products. These are things that are coming down the pipeline. So these, I'm sure Dr. Boggio touched on some of them, but you can see not just factor concentrates, the standard extended half-life concentrates, but some are in development, gene therapy, cellular therapies, also for hemophilia B, looking at some factor 8 mimetics, so not just emicizumab, but another investigational molecule called Mim8, super activated factor 5, and others, factor 7s, and then the rebalancing molecules like fitusiran, looking at causing antithrombin knockdown, different anti-tissue factor pathway inhibitor antibodies, and even activated protein C inhibition. So you can see that I think we've just kind of scratched the surface on how complex management of hemophilia is and is going to be, and not just for hemophilia A and B, but for other bleeding disorders. Because when we start to do these different rebalancing therapies of the coagulation cascade, I think the opportunity for some of our more rare bleeding disorders, factor 7 deficiency, factor 13 deficiency, Glanzmann's thrombocythemia, even using in more severe bleeding in von Willebrand disease. Some of these other rebalancing therapies may find other applications. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that all evolves. So not only that, but, and I think this may be my last slide, and I'm happy to take questions and further the conversation, but I really like this schematic also from Dr. Shapiro's paper, again, just published a few days ago in Hemophilia, looking at what kind of the evolution of hemophilia treatment has been and kind of where we're growing by looking at this tree that's growing. So at the foundation, central root of the tree is patients. And then we have manufacturers and government partners, research scientists and clinical investigators like myself and Dr. Boggio and Simpson and Berkovitz, and then hemophilia treatment centers, right? So kind of we have the root system here that's feeding the trunk of the tree, which is the HTC. And again, if you're on this, call today and you're not part of an HTC, you need to talk with Bob and get plugged into one of us because we can all help you with your bleeding disorder management. And then these are all of the different kind of offshoots of how management through the evolution of hemophilia treatment is going. So we've had hospital-based treatment and on-demand. We've moved to home-based and prophylaxis and individual tailoring. We have non-factor therapies moving towards other mimetics and rebalancing therapies. The factor gene's been cloned. We're moving towards gene therapy. Also, we have bypassing agents with the non-factor therapies, looking at gene editing and cellular therapies. We have recombinant factors with animal and human-free protein, kind of the more standard half-life factors and extended half-life factors. We've got great plasma-derived concentrates, whole blood, starting at kind of the foundation, moving to cryo and plasma and high purity. And then digital technology. So things like I mentioned the goal heme, which is one small aspect of how we're improving things, moving towards point of care musculoskeletal ultrasound. So being able to use artificial intelligence that can help a patient identify with an ultrasound probe plugged into their smartphone, is what they're experiencing in their joint. Is it chronic arthritis, or is there actually a bleed? Because right now our musculoskeletal ultrasound can only really be done at the treatment centers. So moving towards having an at-home therapy and using things like apps and even things that are happening in helping some of our less fortunate parts of the world through the World Federation of Hemophilia, having apps that will help with translation and people of different languages being able to give each other recommendations, is all coming. So it's really exciting to be, part of moving the science forward and taking care of patients both here locally and making impacts that help people across the country and across the world. So that's all I had prepared. And I see some comments there in the chat, but I don't know if there's any other questions.
I think we definitely had some pro HTC comments, which and I wanted to add to that. If anybody did have any questions about the Hemophilia Treatment Center system and going to an HTC, and you're not right now, you don't have to stop going to your current doctor. So that is not the intention of going to a hemophilia treatment center. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, HTCs were there to provide expertise and support, and certainly we work with doctors all across the region. So we're happy to help be part of the collaborative team.
And we'll work with I say we, because I feel like we're all a team, but we'll work with your current doctor to support that doctor and help you, especially if they're close to you, to give you the best care. So, any questions? I have lots, but questions for Jonathan?
I've got a question. So looking at the the goal
Jonathan, you
heme.
want to stop sharing so we can see you?
Oh,
See everybody?
Sure.
sorry.
I
Can you
like
hear
this
me?
tree too.
So
There we go.
looking at goal heme, when you're talking about compliance for hemophilia patients, I had a thought of kind of going back to the grade school fire drill. It's preparation in case of an emergency. So in looking at goal heme, isn't it something similar to that where you're planning an emergency before it actually happens for patients to treat themselves? So it's just kind of that innate process of doing the safety checks. Is that something that's put in place?
Sure. I mean, you can, like I said, you can use this for whatever is important. So it's really working with your treatment center to determine what's important for you that you want to have as a goal. For example, I know from my own life in the past, prior to prophylaxis being a thing in the US commonly, I was in the Scouts, and I went on a backpacking trip for 2 weeks to Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. So to do that, I knew that I would need to be more adherent to a treatment regimen than just treating on demand when I had a bleed. So I spoke with my hematologist at the time, and we decided on a treatment regimen and looked at how many miles I was going to be hiking a day, and determined, okay, I should probably infuse with this dose of factor concentrate like every other day if I'm going this distance, and probably should do it every day if it was more than that, depending on the terrain, etc. And I learned the infusion skills, and we kind of made a plan, and I stuck to it. And thankfully, I was able to hike for 2 weeks carrying factor on my back in the mountains, and I did not have a bleed at that time, which for me was kind of like my first taste of prophylaxis. Like, wow, I don't, so you're exactly right. It was developing a plan, but it wasn't like my traditional, like, this is what I do when I'm at home going to school and I'm not that active. So it is like a safety plan. It is like a preparation plan, but that was a goal that I had in my life at that time, in that season of life. For me to do that now, it would probably look different. I would maybe have different products, and I would do a different regimen and dose and everything. So yeah, it's exactly that. It's looking at what do you want to accomplish that's not just here's the product that you're on. We want to prevent bleeds. How many bleeds did you have? Here's a product you could use, and how good did you do? It's really tailoring, what are patients' hopes and dreams and things they want to accomplish? What do they want to attain for a career? If they have chronic pain, how do we manage that chronic pain? If they are having, depression because of their bleeding disorder, well, how do we improve that? So that may mean not factor related things like, okay, well, you're going to meet with our social worker, once a month, and we're going to get you into a local counselor, and you're going to meet with them once a week and have different things you're going to improve in your life so that you can overcome depression, plus taking maybe some antidepressants, But the way that this kind of goal heme was designed was to be a true all-encompassing tool that could help patients with bleeding disorder. So definitely having a bleeding disorder is part of it. And I think I saw here, Dr. Boggio is asking, do I plan to use for other bleeding disorders? Yes, we actually are talking about doing a goal heme version for like goal VWD. And certainly it could be expanded to other rare bleeding disorders. But, certainly I think there's been a lot of interest in VWD for something like this. And certainly with the new guidelines, 2021 guidelines coming out, treatment and diagnostic guidelines, that the VWD community is kind of another important community that we're learning how to better do prophylaxis, and implementing this in another patient population within the bleeding disorder community is definitely one of our aspirations to do. So, yeah.
You showed the tree that from that study, and it was interesting. I was on the NHF research journal recently, and the person who presented from her team, they're actually looking real far down the line at the possibility of a biomarker. They have some really early data that there's some indication that there's some biomarkers that your body may be telling you you're going to have a bleed. talking about
Yeah.
some really, really interesting things for the future.
Yes.
Maybe down the line, we may be able to kind of monitor and tell prior to a bleed that you're going to have one.
Yeah, I mean, that is there. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I've been some of those discussions I know my colleagues also have. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see from kind of a laboratory perspective how reproducible that is, doing testing that patients could do, maybe not at the HTC, maybe things they could do at home, some kind of monitoring at home. But that's where we're moving. I mean, that's where we need to head towards if we're really going to get, point of care, at the moment of prevention, really, because if we want to treat and prevent bleeds, we need to get better at prevention for sure.
And it's very, very exciting. And then we'll introduce them. I think one of the things that's very different in hemophilia is many chronic diseases you're working towards a cure, and it's been said a number of times, and it's one of the only diseases that we're not working towards a cure. And I think we're going to see that being changed here in the near future. We work for no bleeds is what we work for. And
right.
And that's a whole different mentality. And what does that mean for and I think, what it means a lot of differences for the community. And I think that's one of the things that NHF is doing with their state of the science is kind of shifting the paradigm right now and starting to challenge the whole research sector and saying it is time as a community that we really start looking what a cure means.
Yep. Well, and even that being said, I mean, not to get too far off topic, but if things like gene therapy are moving towards a cure, I feel very strongly about it, and I know a lot of my colleagues do as well, that if someone gets a cure with some gene therapy technique, they still need to be part of the bleeding disorder community, and we still need individuals to follow with their treatment team so that we can help to generate long-term data, not just efficacy and safety data, but quality of life, et cetera. Because these are all new things, right? And we are learning as a community in real time how to use them. It's one thing to do a clinical trial where everyone is crossing T's and dotting I's and patients are on their best behavior and trying to follow things by the book. It's a whole nother thing when it goes into the real world and people start treating as they want to treat. So it's important that we capture that data. So anyone with a bleeding disorder, even if you're not having bleeding events frequently, you need to still be part of the community. We need to.
It's amazing what we've learned it's amazing what we've learned in the last 70 years. Just imagine what we can learn in the next 10, 15, 20.
That's right.
And 70 more. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Simpson from who has Lisa did some introductions, and Dr. Rachel Berkovitz from Lurie's. I know Dr. Berkovitz is on here. It's like there Rachel is. So the rest of the time is really everybody's to kind of process what we've talked about, ask questions. I'd offer kind of starting by, let's let Rachel and Mindy kind of, why don't you give an impression, each of you give an impression of what Lisa and Jonathan have presented and kind of from your perspective. So it's an opening to this next part. Rachel, you want to go first? Welcome.
Sure. Hello, I'm Rachel Berkovitz. I'm a pediatric hematologist, and I work at Lurie Children's Hospital at the HTC there, as well as doing general hematology things. So I think this is actually a very exciting time in hemophilia treatment, just in terms of sort of what's been mentioned that, really for the last several decades, we've been trying to just replace what's missing and do it better and better. But at the point that we're at now with having the rebalancing therapies and the non-factor therapies and sort of the independence that it's offering even our younger patients. As a pediatrician, I really only see children. And so, getting to see 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds who are actually administering their own emicizumab is kind of miraculous, because I don't think any of us think that they're quite ready for doing IV infusions at that age. And so it's just really neat to see how patients' attitudes about their disease have changed, particularly as they're able to do more while sort of having less of their time taken up by treating their hemophilia.
Thank you. Mindy?
Hi, everybody. Mindy Simpson from the Rush Hemophilia Center. Thank you for the invitation for all of us to be here. I think, I don't have a whole lot unique to add to the conversation. I think, the previous presentations have been amazing. I just want to echo, I think, the exciting times that we've been that we're part of right now. I've been in the HTC now for over 10 years. And honestly, when I started and came out of training, even the concept of gene therapy was still, oh, we're not ready. And then, a mere 10 years later, which seems like a blink of an eye, things are going through the FDA, there's newer ideas that are happening, and looking that used to be kind of this, oh, I'm not sure we'll ever get there, to now being in an age where we have not only that as a concept, but all of these other therapies that really, move beyond just the management of hemophilia and really are incorporating, a much broader view of how we can manage bleeding disorders in general. So I think, this whole concept of focusing on hemophilia, is just a matter of numbers, because that's where a lot of the clinical trials can get patients to get the data for things. Anybody here that is part of the rare bleeding disorder community, you recognize that even amongst all of the rare bleeding disorders, there are some that to get enough data for a few patients takes so much longer. So, we're very comfortable with the idea that let's get a product, let's get data, and then let's see what else we can do with it. So I think, it's a very exciting time for the bleeding disorder community in general. And certainly those of us that are treaters for this community, it's fun to go and, like has been mentioned, we're excited about upcoming conferences because we know there's going to be new data that's being presented. We're excited to keep seeing, the follow-up data and what's coming and what people are doing with it. Gene therapy for factor IX was kind of exciting for a little while, and then we found this factor IX Padua variant, and now it's just super exciting, right? And so you just never quite know what's going to come, and I think that's part of the fun of being in this. But we are really happy to always partner with our patients and the community, and are really just grateful to be able to be a part of things like this tonight. So thank you.
I'll jump in with I think people are still wary of clinical trials. And, especially people of color, there's a history of maybe some mistreatment and misunderstanding. So how do we all work together because it is one of the things in rare disease is that we need more numbers. We need more participants, but also we need more cooperation, and we need more understanding that the patient understands that they're not a guinea pig, that they're centered to it, that it is, that it is their benefit, that it is for them too. So there's a mutuality in it. Was there a question there? It's a speech.
The question I heard is like, how do we improve the perception of communities of color and regain,
for everybody, the trust too.
Yeah, and to gain trust that we've, as a medical community, haven't ever truly gained or earned. And so I think actually what it is ensuring that you have a diverse and inclusive hemophilia treatment center staff. I think if everyone on staff is white and then trying to explain studies. I don't know if that works quite as well, but if the patients see that your staff is diverse and that, that the diverse staff is part of the conversation about the studies and sort of addressing specific things. And I think it also means that as, perhaps the person doing the consenting, that I address those things head on rather than not mentioning it or sort of like dancing around the topic, but actually, having that conversation if the patient is, if it seems like that's the conversation and to be had with the patient. And so that's sort of so I think a lot of the onus is on us to be mindful about, who our staff are and how we're approaching patients.
I think one of the things too is that until we're able to train more diverse hematologists and more diverse hematology staff, what about research ambassadors? What about us working with the HTCs? And I know this is just a concept that I'm introducing. So it'd be with training and it'd be with total support. So maybe people that have been through clinical trials and, and that I'm not saying necessarily coming into the HTC maybe, but doing community education. Go ahead.
So I think that's a little background noise, but I can chime in if you want. Sorry. So I will add a couple things. One is I will give a huge shout out to the Chicago community and the Illinois patients and those that are part of our hemophilia centers that I think, honestly, we, as at least I can speak from the Rush HTC, have been approached by specific clinical trials because we have a fairly reasonable track record of having a very diverse population participate. So huge shout out to our patients that have given that trust and allowed to be part of these clinical trials and moving research forward. I completely agree with Rachel. I think, the more diverse we can make our team and just, the overall inclusivity, it definitely helps. Although, we have limitations and kind of, what you can get there. But I'll also my final comment will be is Bob, as you alluded to at the beginning, that we had participated in a study recently about kind of the African-American perception and the HTCs. And although it's not necessarily specific towards, participation in research, obviously these patients and families had to participate in a research type idea in order to even do this. So I think our openness to just continuing to learn about, the hesitations, the barriers, and try to work through that is kind of I think where we can start and keep moving. But, again, I like the idea that, if there's people out there that are willing to talk to others and really advocate for this, there's always commentary in clinical trials that are, global studies on new products and things like that, that does the population that is being studied, does that truly reflect the population of patients with that disorder? So, if 95% of the population in this clinical trial were Caucasian, but not 95% of my patients are Caucasian, does the data, is it all is it all going to be the same for the general population? And I'll be honest, we don't know that answer all the time. So, we're always looking to add diversity to these studies for many, many reasons.
If any community member really wants in on this discussion and wants to be part of this leadership right now, is National Hemophilia Foundation is looking for committee members for their subject matter expert committee. And we actually have an Illinois member on that committee. And we actually have the chair of the committee is from Illinois. So I could refer anybody. And it's really exciting because they're talking about this. So other questions? I have a list. So we are a community that has are used to other conditions affecting people with bleeding disorders. And the latest one is we're getting new data about high blood pressure and arteriosclerosis. And it's actually very surprising data. Probably to me, it was a little counterintuitive. So I'm really interested in how we get that message out there. The latest I'm hearing is we need to be telling 18-year-olds that they need to be worried about high blood pressure. So I'd be interested in all four of you's perspective on what you're hearing about high blood pressure and bleeding disorders.
I suppose as the adult hematologist, I
There
should
we
be the
go.
one that talks about this a bit more.
Yeah,
perhaps
but
more
with
by
the
training.
report I heard, Lisa, was going into like 17, 18-year-olds that now are being put on high blood pressure medication.
Well, this is but for them, I think that our pediatric colleagues could probably tell us more about this too, but high blood pressure is an increased risk for stroke. And a high blood pressure is an increased risk for your heart to work harder, and also a risk for you if you have high blood pressure, have bleeding disorders, and you pop a blood vessel, it's going to bleed. And where's it going to pop? It's going to pop in your head. So that's a stroke. And the people who have strokes are people who have diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It takes years usually to get to that point. But I think in our younger patients as well, a lot of our people's lifestyles have changed. And that's where I think where instead of when you're in your 30s, you're worried about this stuff, being worried about it younger, because our kids are sitting on the computer all day. They're not going outside. They're not playing. They're not exercising. They're not participating in sports. These are all things that lead into high blood pressure or other conditions that could put you at risk. Having a bleeding disorder does not protect you against having a heart attack. It's less like it's going to be a severe heart attack or stroke, but people have had strokes who have bleeding disorders.
If I understood some of the data though, it's looking like just from bleeds from bleeding disorder that the vascular scarring is what's could possibly be causing a higher incidence of increased blood pressure with people with bleeding disorders. So no matter what you do, there's a likelihood that you're going to have higher blood pressure, or if you don't take care of yourself, and even like Dr. Roberts is talking about, be as adherent as you can from the youngest age and keep your bleeding rate down, that you're at risk.
I think the more you damage an organ, the higher the risk is of having other organs fail. So our patients who had hepatitis C, they have all the complications from that. They can have clotting, they can have bleeding. I think that's it's mainly due to inactivity, but the actual article about that, and it was originally published in 2012, was talking about unhealthy eating habits, inactivity were really the reasons, rather than you having bleeds in your blood vessels changing. But if you're also anemic because you've been bleeding all the time, you're more likely to have high blood pressure because your heart has to work harder to maintain the actual blood pressure. I mean, there's other things there. So
Share this information with you. So it was the NHF research. What do they call that research discussion? They have that. They review 2 papers.
like a journal club.
Yeah, their journal club.
Mhm.
So it was, yeah. So
Yeah, but that it may not. It's not. Is it due to your blood vessels, or is it due to the fact that you don't do any sports?
They
And
were
you're sitting
talking-
around and you're not fit and you're overweight and you're eating chips and all the things I like to eat, all the
we'll talk,
carbs, right?
we'll talk a little bit more about this since you're not familiar with it, because it just was, it was very interesting. So, and I'm not a, yeah, so I'll share it with you.
I've seen it. I just
It was all
don't
about,
necessarily agree with your conclusion,
it was all about vascular, is what it was.
but I don't know that I agree with your
I understand.
interpretation of
I know.
the results of what they presented.
I understand. So, we haven't talked tonight about, we've been talking about balancing, and we've been talking, but we haven't talked much about the diagnostic journey. And there's still people out there that that really struggle with the diagnosis, and there's the bleeding of, am I right, bleeding of unknown causes, or
You mean unrecognized bleeding?
well, it's just that we can't quite get to, like, there's like multiple things working, multiple breakdowns in the system for certain people.
Yeah, there is a term that some people are using, like a bleeding disorder of unknown cause, BDUC. Yeah. And there was a not so distant publication, kind of a how to treat, how to diagnose type thing like that. And it's those patients that come in with, bleeding symptoms that, in all fairness, we as treaters really believe they should have something. We should be able to find a problem. We should be able to find something that is causing this, because the bleeding symptoms are substantial enough that it's, beyond what we would typically say could be a version of normal. But through all the diagnostic testing, we just can't put kind of, our finger on it. So there are those patients, and I can, in my head, I have a litany of them that I, kind of say, well, I'm going to keep following you because I'm just not quite sure what's going to happen. And especially with our little kids, right? So, we often, when you're being sent a patient for, nosebleeds or easy bruising or something along those lines, or they had bleeding after a procedure, it depends on kind of, what it was and how significant it was. You try to kind of gauge whether or not you think there's likely a problem, or if it could be, just a version of normal. And, we all have a workup that we pursue. But if you get to a point, either if you have somebody that you really think you should be able to find something, you continue down the road of, the more rare to the more rare to the more rare of things. And even when you've done that, there are some patients that just still don't have anything. So, or maybe have borderline things you just can't quite give the diagnosis to. So, it's what do you do? How do we manage them if they have these bleeding symptoms? I still think that hematologists are probably the best equipped, of course, to help manage even symptoms sometimes. So we often will use more standardized scores. So there's something, the ISTH BAT, or the bleed assessment tool, gives a more kind of objective guideline of, okay, is your bruising, is your bleeding symptoms, are they really more significant or not? And so, this particular tool, it kind of gives a score based on how significant. So if you have one nosebleed that lasts for 3 minutes and never have another one, that's going to be a score of 0, right? But if you have a nosebleed that then gets you to the point of having to be in the hospital, get a blood transfusion and cautery and all these other things, that's going to be more of like a score of 4, right? And so, and you add these up, heavy menstrual bleeding, how significant is it? Is, procedure, all these different types of things. And so, typically for the diagnosis of the bleeding disorder of unknown cause, you should have an objective score that says that you likely have a significant bleeding kind of story, in which case then, maybe our testing just isn't there yet. And like we've talked about with therapies, we are getting better about testing as well. We know that there are parts of that coagulation cascade that Lisa showed that we do better at testing than others, right? We do okay at testing platelet disorders, but we don't do fantastic. There are definitely pieces of that story that we're missing. We don't do a great job at all about testing the clot breakdown process. And so, there are pieces that certainly are going to get filled in over time, and maybe our testing just isn't there yet. So, so there's definitely people out there that have bleeding symptoms, and they shouldn't necessarily just be brushed away,
Thank you very much. I really,
but that's kind of, that is.
Yeah. And I like even that objective score, I think would help some people to seek that out and even seek out coming to an HTC because they've been told no so often that it's even hard for us to encourage them to go to HTC. They'll say, why? What am I going to hear differently? So maybe there you just gave us a new tool, all of us a new tool, is to say that. So because
Well, for us, if they bleed and something happens and I can't find the test, doesn't mean they don't have a bleeding disorder.
yeah,
And that's kind of the point. Our testing isn't perfect and we may not catch things that are there. So
Yeah.
I think that that's the issue. If someone's having bleeding symptoms, and we got plenty of them, that bleed when something happens to them, they have a bleeding disorder. Can I label you with a specific bleeding disorder? Maybe not, but there's something there and I believe it. And if you're gonna have surgery or something is happening, I need to treat that.
thank you for believing in that because we have and that's why we need to get them to HTCs because and we all need to work together to get that story out there because there's a lot of people that have a lot of barriers and they just have a hard time, so I'm trying to talk them into getting to the HTC. They've already had a lot of
Seeing a coagulation specialist would make a difference because I have had referrals from other physicians for even something as simple as iron deficiency, which is sometimes kind of sort of simple, but not, you would think. And they looked at the results and said, well, this isn't iron deficiency. And I looked at them and said, well, this is clearly iron deficiency because they don't know these tests are not that easy to interpret. And that's why we do this. We figured it out in a way. At least it makes a little bit of sense for us. I don't know everything and I know I don't know everything, but when I look at the coagulation cascade and I look at the bleeding stuff, it makes complete sense to me. Whereas one of my colleagues who is also a hematologist, but doesn't do coagulation things, they don't get it at all. It's like asking me to explain something endocrine
neurosurgery,
or something. I'm like, really, I have no flipping clue. So there's strengths and some people instinctively understand things. I think that's what attracts us to do this in a way is that it kind of makes a little bit of sense to us. It makes sense to me, at least it's me.
It's what you do every day. And that's what we try to explain too, is that we try to use the example is that your doctor may see you and not ever see another person like you in his entire career. Whereas the person I'm trying to get you to go see sees you every week.
Well, I think it's also important too, like as Dr. Boggio was saying, that oftentimes these results, it's not just one number that you're using to make a diagnosis or decide what to do. It's usually a combination of lab results and that sort of a thing. And so as Dr. Boggio was mentioning, if it's another physician who's not a hematologist, they may not know how to look at all of the numbers together to make the complete picture. They're just focused on one number that has an arrow going up or down, meaning it's abnormal, which is the way that they put it on lab sheets and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other issues too is that I don't think we provide enough education, like as a society, about menstruation. I think that there are a lot of people who have abnormal uterine bleeding who don't necessarily recognize it because we don't always talk about menstruation. I mean, I talk about it like almost every day on the job and sometimes off the job. But I think that most people end up talking about menstruation with their family members. And so if you ask people like, is your period normal? Well, if mom bleeds for 14 days in a row and goes through like a box of tampons in 2 days, and that's what every other person in the family who menstruates is doing, then that does seem normal to that family. And so I think really providing better education, even, in elementary schools about what is normal menstruation and what is abnormal menstruation from sort of like the broader perspective, just knowing how heritable a lot of our bleeding disorders are. And so ensuring that people know what's normal outside of their family.
That is so good. It's exactly. And I think as a society, the more we get that we can talk about, talk genderless and talk as humans, we will break down some of those barriers, because as you do, Rachel, too, after 30 years of working in this, I talk about menstruation way too much for some people, but you would not believe the people that have because of, and people know that Lisa and I are very good friends, and I picked up her from very early on, her like, this is normal, this is not, from her slides. And I kind of carried those around with me, which sounds weird, but I probably found 40 women that are like, what do you mean that 10 days isn't normal? What do you mean 2 weeks, like you're saying? And then give them the information and find out. So it just is, yeah. So it's just a shame.
And I think we really need to empower, we have a lot of family members of people with bleeding disorders.
Yeah.
And they also have bleeding disorders.
Right.
And maybe theirs isn't as severe as their child or their cousins or whatever it is, but they still have a bleeding disorder and they need to take care of themselves. And I think that we have to allow people, we have a tendency not to do this, especially with women, have a tendency to take care of everybody else. This happens with men too, but everybody else before they take care of themselves. And you're no good to anybody else until you take care of you. So you get your stuff together, you figure it all out, and then that'll help you to take care of your other family members as well. And we keep, we obviously hear stories that we know that, we have moms of kids with hemophilia who have factor levels in the single digits. Mm-hmm. That's not good. And they bleed a lot and they have joint disease. And I know we went through that. You and I have been talking about this for a long time, like our type 3 von Willebrand friend, that she changed the thoughts of a lot of the men that we were dealing with, because she goes, well, I have joint bleeds all the time. My factor rate is 0. Mm-hmm. I don't have any factor rate. I don't know what you're, and they were surprised. So the more we talk amongst ourselves too, or patient to patient, or friend to friend, or in these areas of, or even support group areas for people, is to find out you're not unusual. There's things you can do and you don't have to suffer. That's really the point.
Yeah. Morale, you have a question. Can you unmute yourself or?
Yeah, actually my question was from quite a few minutes back, going back to gene therapy trials and things like that. It's actually for all the doctors who are still present and listening. What I've found following gene therapy trials and all the rules and regulations and the exclusions, et cetera, that as we age in the aging population, I don't think at this point, only a very few of us will qualify to participate. There was this conversation, how do we include people about, diversity and color and things like that? But I see that age is going to be an exclusion only because of conditions, other conditions that they start having. People like us never lived this long until 20 years ago. And so I see that clinical trials for gene therapy is most likely not going to be including us because of all the other comorbidities that we may have developed, high blood pressure, diabetes, any kind of condition, heart murmur, any of those conditions that we develop as we age. So the question, well, that was mainly the comment, but the question still is gene therapy for people like us at this age? I'm not even asking, oh, because you have antibodies to AAV or any other thing, because if we are not included in the trial for whatever reason, is it really for people at our age?
So I'll jump in quickly with a quick comment about that. I think, although many clinical trials may only go up to 65, I'm not certain about all of the gene therapy trials. The reality is, especially for factor VIII, we're looking at the potential that these current therapies, now we hope that there's going to be future generations that are better, but maybe these current therapies may have a shorter effective time. If you have a therapy that's 5 to 10 years effective, I think it really comes down to what does the patient want? There's going to be criteria. The FDA are absolutely going to be putting some guidelines around this because it's going to be extremely expensive. And so the payers are going to have a play, and we as treaters are going to potentially have, a smaller role in deciding who can and can't have this right away. But if you go back to even Dr. Roberts' slides about the kind of the goal attainment ideas, I think it depends, I think even though I'm more of a pediatric treater, I think we want to support our patients throughout their entire lifespan. And if there's a therapy that offers, a strong 5-year effective time, and if that's the time that you want to have it in, kind of the later years, if we can get it for you, then I think, it will be discussed.
I kind of think that's the big debate. We argue this all the time, which is what's the ideal age group to have gene therapy? Because the young people are like, oh, I'll get it because they're, they are not risk adverse, shall we say. So if you're in the 20s, they'll take it. But then if they only get 5 years, is that the ideal group, or is it actually our older group? That they're more likely to sustain a level and therefore not need to go back to therapy because they've had 5 or 10 years and they're approaching their lifespan. The only big thing is, remember, any treatment for hemophilia causes blood clots, right? That's what we're doing. We're making you clot. So if someone's already so it's looking at those risk factors. If someone's already had a blood clot, they're not at this point eligible, right? If they've had a stroke or a heart attack or have all these other things that might have happened already, they wouldn't be eligible because the risk of their having a significant clot that will affect their lives and cause them not to be functional, that's a big deal. So it's do no harm first, right? So we don't want to harm folks, but I'm more of the my thought is that someone a little older perhaps is a little bit better for gene therapy because you're not likely to have to change your life or have to go back and you haven't infused for 10 years and then you're so like, oh, well, I'm having bleeds. I don't understand. Someone who's a little older has a little more insight perhaps into those kind of things is what I'm thinking. But we argue this all the time because who's the right person? I think it's the right person is the person who wants to do it. And I think that's the point.
And one thing
that's the point Mindy was making.
I also want to advocate is that this is the doctor and the patient are the ones that should be advocating it. And we're going to have a big fight that it's not the payer that's going to be, that's really what we're looking at is the payer who is going to be in the fight. And that's where we need to take them out of the fight. And that's going to be really hard.
Fortunately, they're in the fight already.
They are in the fight already, but
because even to get factor.
And again, whenever we
buy certain payers, we have patients who cannot get factor.
When we call for, that's why we need advocacy ambassadors. That's why we need people to go to Washington and people to go to Springfield and people need to visit their legislators. It's because they are after us right now. We are no longer the hidden condition. Rachel, did you have anything to add to this one?
So, as one of the, as our local PI for the gene therapy trial, I think as Dr. Simpson said and Dr. Boggio, that it's about like who wants the therapy and sort of how do they view that specific therapy is going to improve their ability to live the life that they want to live. I think, Dr. Simpson made a great point that unfortunately, as physicians, we don't always get to control the parameters, particularly with respect to like age and eligibility. And certainly as things come on the market, we do tend to sort of drift away from the population that was eligible to the study and sort of move farther away from that as more experience is had with other people, also moving away from just the study population. And so I think, the gene therapy certainly has, and, it's almost like a very reasonable alternative to prophylactic factors, sort of like the factors that have an extremely long half-life, cut down the number of times you have to infuse. Well, that's sort of what the gene therapy does, is it's basically providing sort of the prophylactic level that's, better than most prophylaxis that we have.
A little commercial and Rachel, it's a different date than we've talked about, and I'm not sure we're looking at doing a similar event to this, just focusing on gene therapy on August 11th, virtual. Are you available? I know I've talked to you several days, so.
I can get back to you about that.
I know, please do.
Okay.
I know. And I appreciate it. I appreciate going back and forth. I had scheduled the first one at ISDH. So we've looked at, and what we're going to do is have all of the four main clinical, the four companies that are doing the clinical trials also talk about what they're working on too. I had kind of two more questions as we come to the end. One was, as we've had these like alternative treatments, and still need factor. One of the things we're finding at BDAI is, we've had a couple phone calls that says, take me off the list, I've been cured. And I'm going, it's an alternative treatment, it's not a cure. Oh no, I just take it now underneath, I just take a little shot underneath my stomach and it's cured me. So I want to ask each of you, because I've challenged the company, how do we teach people that it's an alternative treatment and about the continuing need, like Dr. Roberts was saying, for the family to still know how to infuse and what the need is for factor, the potential for clotting. I know I never ask just subject matter, a quick question. But I think it's something that's really important to this community, is that, especially at the pediatric level, that families really need to understand that there's more to these treatments than just taking the new treatment. Rachel or Mindy?
I certainly never use the word cure
Oh,
when I'm talking with families about.
Before I get started, I don't believe this is coming from our medical providers at all. I think it's sort of what I would call halo, is they just get in and get excited and they hear blah, blah, blah under the stomach, blah, 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 once or twice a week. And it's just not getting in their head. So I
I think this is a marketing issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's coming from our providers.
Oversold in a way to patients that they have been basically lied to.
So I don't know, I'm not blaming, I think our providers are working really hard the same way we are to direct them to the right information. And you guys are doing the harder work. So I'm asking how we can work together. So please, go ahead, Rachel, I'm sorry.
So, it's certainly propaganda regarding drugs and hemophilia is certainly out there. But I think also what I've noticed, particularly with our teenagers, who we actually end up switching them to emicizumab because they've been having so many bleeds that we haven't been able to control on a reasonable factor regimen. And then they suddenly get on emicizumab and now they're going like months or years without a bleed, and they're just not used to that life. Like the idea that they're not having a bleed once a week or once a month any longer, I think that they sort of feel like they're cured because they're not having the problematic symptoms that they were. But you know, certainly we work more on like the individual basis to ensure that families recognize that bleeds can still happen, that bleeds can happen with surgeries and procedures, and that they still need to let us know what's happening, and that factor is not gone from their lives. And it's just still something that rather than having like 900 boxes in their refrigerator, we want them to have 1 or 2, but you know, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a paradigm shift of, you know, whether it's somebody that's on really good prophylaxis and not bleeding, whether it's somebody that's on, you know, the new therapy that they don't have to use very much, you know, or any, you know, bleed doses, things like that. You know, there's always this idea that, oh, now I'm so much better. Now you know, I'm cured. I've had so many people, oh, now can I go play football? No, you know, I mean, if you're speaking specifically of emicizumab, I mean, you take somebody that has severe hemophilia and you make them a chronically mild hemophilia patient, they do feel better. It changes them. But, you know, we follow our mild hemophilia patients in clinic, just like, you know, everybody else. So, you know, so there is a little bit of a shift. You know, I think, I'll put a shout out to the idea that we also have patients that because their bleeds feel different, it doesn't always mean they're not bleeding. And so there's this concept now of kind of untreated bleeds where they wait things out. And so just because something feels different doesn't mean it's not potentially still going to be problematic. And so I think, you know, I can probably speak to most of the treaters that, you know, we work really hard at kind of continuing that education, continuing to advocate for our patients to, you know, remember how to do infusions, maintain some supply of factor for those, you know, what if cases. And then I'll flip the switch to, you know, the number of adolescent girls I've had that come in with heavy menstrual bleeding who then start hormonal therapy. I have had more people than I can count to say, oh, I'm cured now, I'm on hormones. And it's like, no, just your one main symptom has now been managed, right? But that doesn't mean that
surgery. Yeah,
exactly. That if you need to go and, you know, get your tonsils out, it's not potentially going to be a problem for you.
Yeah.
So, you know,
for that. Yeah.
So I think, you know, anytime you get good management, there's this concept that, oh, okay, I'm good now. And it's like, no, this is why we want to keep following you.
Would it be is it fair to call it like a halo effect and start talking like from not from a medical side? If we were to, you know, there's almost a practical way. Is there a word that we could talk about, and maybe we can talk offline and think about a way to start talking to people? It's like, okay, it's okay to be happy right now, but here's reality. So it's like, balance this out.
Well, we have patients that have a bleed and say, I had a knee bleed. And I said, well, what did you do for it? I just watched it. Well, you're causing damage to your joints with that. So the point is, the bleed was going to happen much less often. It's going to happen with trauma. It's going to happen with some sort of injury. But there were things that were said in the beginning that this is superior to factor. Well, it's not superior to factor. It is a different way of giving treatment.
Right.
And it does work in preventing bleeding, but you still have to treat a bleed or take care of something that is happening in it. And you have to take the medication. So we've had people who also stop taking their meds because, well, I've been fine. I haven't had a bleed for so long. I just don't feel like taking it anymore. And then a bleed happens.
Yeah.
There's been lots of studies in chronic illnesses about people taking medicines on a regular basis. It's not easy to do. And we know it's not easy to do.
Yes.
And that's why we have people come back so we can talk to them And where you sort of give, like going to the dentist, you know, who flosses? I mean, maybe some people here do, every single day, but not, you know, but then, you know, you have a dentist appointment. If you're not one of those everyday people, you're like, well, I gotta floss every day before I go see the dentist, and then I'll floss for a week after seeing the dentist. And then I just need that little impetus every 6 months to remind myself to do something like that. It's very similar. Any medicine is like that.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, I floss the morning of the dentist appointment and then try to lie my way through it and then never get away with it. Never. So, and I don't know, sometime I'm gonna learn. Yeah, I know, John. Sometime I'm gonna learn.
Hey, Bob, I also want to just put a quick shout out to the idea that even like with gene therapy and things like that, people need to remember that, you know, even when you get that, this still stays in the family. So you can still pass hemophilia on to children. And so, you know, that we talk about these, you know, up and coming things and, you know, potential for working towards cure, those types of things. That's for the individual. That still can continue to translate through to, you know, future generations. So just, you know, remember that.
Right. I would end. Anybody else have any questions? Because I have a closing question for everybody. So I thank you very much for everybody is on tonight, for our docs. What is each of your thoughts in closing of like BDAI and us and this community? If you were to add one thing that we could all do to work better together.
I think it's communication. It's always things that really, I think that's things that break down is communication, whether it's not that we're not talking to each other, but you may think you're saying something and what someone is understanding is not what you thought you said. It happens to me a lot. And those kind of things, that how we communicate and just bringing it right up to the front of, especially if either, not that you're not understanding it, but that it's good to repeat stuff back to people. So that's, I think, helpful. So I think communication and increasing communication and not assuming people know a lot of stuff that maybe they don't know, or if they know it already and you feel like I'm being too simple with you, to say, oh, yes, and then put your 2 cents in. I was like, okay, you understand that one. Okay, good. So, you know, it makes it a much more interactive conversation rather than just me talking at you.
So if I heard you right, it's that at times that when we're talking, I might not quite understand and I might walk away thinking what you said was different. So it's best for me to repeat it back to you and say, is this what you said to me? Correct?
Correct.
So that's an example right there.
And even I should do that to you.
And the doctor, you can do that with your doctor. We can all do that with each other. And it really helps the world in so many ways, because there's so many times that the person says, that's not what I said at all. And you walk away and you've said it to 50 people. And then it gets back to that person. And it's like, where the hell did you hear that? Well, Dr. Boggio told me that. And Lisa's, and I'm just, because it's Lisa and I, and Lisa's like, I never said that, you know. And if you just say back to her, you know, and I don't mean to pick on Dr. Boggio, but we all do that as humans.
Oh, no, I do it all the time. So
we all do it as humans.
It might have been what came out of my mouth, but that's not what was in my head.
Yeah.
And I think we all do that every day.
We all do it as humans because we hear what we want to hear too. And our perspective is 100% right. Mindy?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, you know, agree. Communication is probably everything. I think, you know, there's several layers, and as a bleeding disorder community and those of us that support the community, you know, I think that is such a powerful tool that the bleeding disorder community has is each other, right? And so, you know, you think about other disease states, and maybe I'm just, you know, ignorant to the support that's out there, but when you talk to other people and we talk about, you know, the education that our patients get, that we talk about how good of advocates our patients and their families are for each other. You know, we often get that, oh, that's great, I wish they had that in, you know, another disease state. So, you know, I think, you know, from the you know, from the pharma industry, just, you know, the ongoing support for education, for continuing science and continuing to move all this forward. You know, I mean, as centers, we rely a lot on, you know, the education that you guys provide, the materials and things like that, that help us to provide, you know, good solid information to our patients and families. To the patients and families themselves, just, you know, we welcome conversations and we welcome, you know, discussions, and maybe you don't like what I'm saying, and if what I'm offering as an idea isn't going to work for you, you know, please just tell us. You know, I think we're all trying to do this together, and we recognize that there are barriers that maybe I'm not even aware of at times. And so, you know, I just would say, have an open conversation about what you want. What are your goals? You know, if it's Morali wanting gene therapy, you know, then fantastic. Let's see if we can find a way for that, if you're the right person for that. If it is somebody else that says, no way am I ever going to touch that, well, let's talk about what else there is. So, you know, I think that part. And then just as you know, a community and organization, you know, I think even education events like this and all of the things, the support that BDAI does for the bleeding disorder community here is really remarkable. And so I think, you know, continuing to support you know, events like this, you know, is really huge. So thank you.
I thank you very much. And it really is that I think a theme for all of us is breaking down barriers, and really that idea that all of us, and especially from the patient, is that we can share communication and we can openly talk, and that it is that you can talk to your doctor and you can talk to that team, even if you're not happy with something that's going on. That was one of the most interesting things that came out of the study. The study that I just saw the results, is that was what your team was asking. Please tell us how we can improve. Please tell us what we're doing wrong. We want to be better. And I hear from patients, oh, we can't tell our doctor they're doing wrong because what if they go away? Illinois, our team's not going away. They want to do better. They want to hear that feedback. And so, and let me tell you, if they get mad at you, call me, because I'll be right there to advocate and say, I told them they wouldn't get mad at you. Why'd you get mad at them? So I'll be right there to help you, because I don't believe they will. So Rachel, and we're right. Thank you guys all for staying a minute. So
Well, I don't have much to add, which I guess is one of the benefits of going last in something like this. But I certainly do appreciate the community that, you know, you guys have helped foster, and specifically, you know, sort of working with patients and families to advocate for themselves and to empower them that they are equals in the patient-doctor relationship, and that, like, you know, if we're not doing what they need us to do, the fact that you're advocating for them to talk to us, or if you talk with us, you know, that we can improve. And, you know, maybe we're improving for one specific family, but it may have an effect on how we treat other families as well. And so, you know, sort of beyond that, just one-on-one type conversation. So I guess that's what I have to say about that.
I think, yeah. And yeah, and so, and we continue to work together. So for those of you who are joining us on Saturday morning live, or if you haven't also signed up for virtual, you can still do that, because we will be virtual all day also. But thank you very much. Time are we starting Saturday? What? Go ahead. I'm gonna everybody should. We starting Saturday. Go ahead. The first session. First session is at 9:15 Central Time, or 9:45, right, Lily? Okay. 10 Central Time. We'll send out the agenda. You know,
Okay.
we'll send out the agenda and the welcome packet tomorrow. So
All right then.
thank you all for a wonderful evening. A special thank you again to our docs. And have a one. Yeah.
Thank you.
that
Thank
was
you,
really
guys.
good. Thank you.
Good
See you
guys.
What a
soon.
good
Thank you,
evening.
everybody, for your participation.
Oh my God, it was so good.
Soon.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Baldo.
And no,
Hi.
thank you for my short comment. Thank you for the doctors. Thank you for BDAI for all the information. I think so. We need working together with the community, bring more education, because the team has a lot of topics for working together with the community, for the young community, for everyone. Thank you, everyone. We have a lot of job for working together.
Good, good. We'll see you Saturday.
See you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.
Night, everybody.